Good evening, brothers and sisters.
Good evening.
So my reflection today is taken from the longer version of today's gospel. In this longer version of today's gospel, we see that Jesus approached Peter, Andrew, and said, "Come after me, and I will make you fishers of men." They left everything behind, boats and nets, and followed him. Likewise, Jesus called James and John, and they too left everything behind, including their father Zebedee, and followed Jesus. We too have been called by Jesus. We too left everything behind. But we often tend to forget a very important aspect of this call. At once, immediately, they left their nets, boats, and father behind and followed Jesus. It is not a question of whether they were ready or capable of answering Jesus' call and be disciples. They were not ready. They were not up to the task. Regardless, they dropped everything and followed. The same is true with us, religious and baptized Christians. Jesus called all of us, often without any miracles, no signs, without any guarantees of security, as we see in today's gospel. We too have followed. But like St. Peter, somewhere along the way, amid the struggles and storms of this life, we realize that all this time we have been walking over waters. And once we set our eyes upon ourselves, we quickly begin to sink. This sinking takes place in a very particular way for each one of us. It may be feelings of shame, fear, the discouragement that arises from the unacceptance of our own flaws and brokenness. We are not as perfect as we wish we were. Perhaps it may be envy, feeling inferior, dumber than others, or depression, self-dejection, and an unhappiness with ourselves, which lead us to be critical and judgmental of others, so that we may feel better about ourselves. The life of faith is a life without any human security. Our only security is in the person and the promise of the risen Christ. However, if we are truly honest with God and with ourselves, we will realize the fact that much of the faith and trust that we claim to profess in God is rather a faith and trust on ourselves and on our own strength. We do all we can to escape the feeling of powerlessness, the fear that arises from realizing that we are not in control, that we are not good enough, and that we are constantly sinking under the waters. We see this in the life of St. Peter. Even after seeing the risen Christ, the discouragement that came from his triple denial of Jesus made him seek security and comfort in going back to the very thing he left behind when Jesus called him. He went fishing. And worse, he brought others with himself. He did not realize that in showing the wounds in his hands and side, the risen Jesus was teaching the disciples an example to follow. We too must uncover our wounds and present them to Jesus in order to be healed. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. In asking this question 3 times of Peter, Jesus put his fingers in Peter's wounds. He was saddened by the question because Jesus made him face the reality of his own sinfulness, of his own infidelity, a reality that he too was trying to evade. Brothers and sisters, this is the mystery of God's mercy through the suffering in our lives. We do all we can to evade the acceptance of our poverty and our need of God's mercy. In turn, in his mercy, God continues to put his fingers in our wounds through the suffering he allows us to experience. He wants us to be faced with the truthfulness of our poverty so that we may realize how much we need him. He wants us to realize that the only road to the bosom of the Father is our trust in his merciful love. What are the places in your life that Christ has been placing his finger? What are the wounds that you've been trying to hide from yourself, from others? and from God. Let us not fear that the acceptance of our brokenness will make us unlovable. Rather, let us believe that in showing our wounds, Jesus will love us all the more. He knows we cannot change ourselves. Only His grace can do that. Love, the more it lowers itself, the more it reveals itself in its greatness. Isn't that the meaning of the Incarnation? Let us ask for the grace of humility so that we may grow in acceptance, patience with ourselves, and trust in God's mercy. Let us also accept that we are sinking under the waters, or better, let us allow ourselves to sink deep below these waters, trusting in God's mercy. Isn't this the meaning of baptism? Being buried with Christ in His passion to rise again with Him. There will be no resurrection if we first do not die to the self-deception we create for ourselves. We need to die to our self-reliance and our self-condemnation. But most of all, we need to realize that God loves us, not because we are good, but because He is good. Jesus called Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Immediately, they followed. They were to become fishers of men, even though they were not ready and they did not have it all together. Jesus called each one of us and continues to do so. He wants to make of us fishers of men, even though we are not ready and we do not have it all together. Are you willing to leave behind everything, to leave yourself behind and stay naked before Christ as you are, not as you wish you were, and follow Him? Are you willing to let Him, not you, make you a fisher of men?